Can everyone have a quick look at this? And one of the things I do at every single ENCC is community is a very big part of this, because obviously you can learn from the speakers' presentations, but there's also a huge amount that you can learn and take away from each other. And because the focus of my presentation is on artificial intelligence, this is an interesting statement that I actually put to the group in London earlier this year. Is it possible to convert an entire platform of tools into a comprehensive marketing automation function that doesn't rely on a person to decide what to send, when to send it, or how to write it? And so it's a little controversial, but what I would love you to do as a way of introducing yourselves to someone immediately beside you, if you guys want to take just 2 minutes and just talk about that and think and discuss what you think about that. So you got 2 minutes, and say hello to someone. Okay, everyone here? Okay, great. So just out of curiosity, how many people actually having a discussion about this statement actually believe that, whether that's now or in whatever, in 5 years from now, that this is actually, could be a true statement? Interesting, okay, yep, great. All right, well listen, so I'm gonna talk about accessible intelligence, and I'm gonna start from the beginning and explain to you what accessible intelligence is and how that relates to engaging networks. And we're gonna go through a conversation about different aspects of AI and how that is already impacting and can have a very significant, if not disruptive, impact on the work that the nonprofit sector does in its marketing to your supporters. There's 7 little components to this conversation. The first one is just an overview of basically our approach to machine learning. The second is kind of our workflows, the second section, so how our models work and how they work with digital marketing teams at nonprofits. The third is just a bit of information about the actual product itself. The fourth is a section just talking about some of the outcomes that our pilot clients have had on the technology, using the technology. The next one is a little bit of a review of what we're doing in terms of roadmap. And then the last section is something that relates to this very controversial statement that you guys have just been talking about. So let's get started. And we'll get started at the beginning. Can you guys hear me okay if I'm not close to the mic? Okay, perfect. So listen, so what is accessible intelligence? Some of you will already know, many of you may not know. It is a separate company, but we shared ownership with Engaging Networks, so we call it our sister company. But it's a business that was set up in many ways almost like the AI research and development lab for Engaging Networks. So that was kind of the idea. Several years ago, when machine learning, which is this sort of discipline of AI that's really transformed so many areas of the economy and life in general in a broader sense, when that started, I'm just a curious person, and I wondered, how could this new technology, this new approach to artificial intelligence called machine learning, how can that be used to actually make our tools more effective for our clients? So that was kind of the simple starting point. And rather than trying to kind of interfere with what was going on in Engaging Networks and the platform, the idea was, let's create a separate company called Accessible Intelligence, and let's use that as an opportunity to really dig into this question of how machine learning can be leveraged to help our clients essentially do their jobs more effectively, be more successful. And so that's what Accessible Intelligence is as a company. And where we landed with all of that was essentially this. It's a machine learning and AI, I'll just refer to it as AI. It's an AI platform that is focused on solving problems, which is what algorithms do. Algorithms are made to solve problems. And so it's built around use cases. So your problems, which are effectively, you would probably label them as challenges, are we'd like to build up our sustainer file from our single donor. So we'd like our activist non-donors to become a donor. Or we would like to make sure that we are engaging our supporters in the right way that are starting to disengage from our marketing communications. We'd like to maintain the longevity of our monthly donors further than we currently do. Those are what we call use cases. They're all kind of problems. And again, the approach is to say, okay, can we help you produce a stream of communication within each of those use cases to essentially generate a better outcome than you could do if you were just working on your own. So that's the premise of what accessible intelligence does. It's actually not the premise, it's actually what it does. So let me just talk about machine learning. Machine learning, again, it's sort of just think of it as a discipline of AI. And there's three key components. Data is by far the most important, because without huge amounts of data, machine learning can't do anything. The second one is this sort of middle box, which is I labeled as analysis and prediction. It's when you have models running within applications that are looking at that data to essentially predict outcomes. And then you have implementation. So for example, if I was to say, here's someone, an individual within your data set or a group of people within your data set of supporters that you think would be good candidates to upsell to a monthly donor, the question is, how can you automate that process of getting the appropriate communication to that person? So what's the implementation? So if you use the data and you predict the outcome, can you then just make it a complete circuit and actually then automate the email communication that goes out to those individuals to achieve that outcome? So those are the three components, and I'm going to talk about each one of them very quickly. As I'm sure you know, as clients of Engaging Networks, transaction data is one of those data sets that our models use. So did someone click on an email? Did someone make a donation? How much did they donate? Are they a monthly donor? What kind of other activity did they engage with? And that's one data set. The other really, really important data set, because there's a certain amount that algorithms can do with just this information. It could make certain predictions based on having just access to this information. So it could say, now is the time to send someone an email, or maybe you should focus on sending out whatever. But there's one piece that was always missing when we started this whole process years ago, which was not just the mechanical data set of when people are engaging with your content, but what content are they engaging with? What is the emotive response to someone reading one of your emails that triggers them to click through and make a donation? So what is that? And that's when you get into what we call content classification. So the other data set that connects to this transaction history is the content of the emails that triggered the activity. And so we have in-house data labelers, and I'll talk about what we're doing to automate some of this. But basically what we're trying to do is say, okay, if people engaged with an email, converted, did something, what was in the email that triggered that activity? But in order to do that, that means you need to somehow convert into a data set the qualities of the email that you've written. So if you've written a nice email, the question is, how do you describe that email as a database so that algorithms can read that information in conjunction with transactional information to be able to then do a better job of predicting outcomes? So we actually have spent a long time challenging our own assumptions about how to qualify data. So there's 40 content categories now that we use with different values in each category that data labelers go through in a consistent way to be able to describe any email for a client using accessible intelligence. So we created it into a data set, and we had to tear this apart and rebuild it, because even though you might think something's important, if it doesn't influence the accuracy of the prediction of an algorithm, then it's not something that you should be capturing. But you don't know that at the beginning, so you have to describe huge amounts of that content in a lot of different ways to figure out which of those content classification categories and values are actually going to influence the prediction, the accuracy of the prediction. So that's the data side of it. Then you get into analysis and prediction. And there's really two bits to this. One is creating clusters. So you've got the data. Now you're saying, for this use case, getting one-time donors to become monthly donors or sustainers, however you label them, how do we put people within our database that are similar into what we call a cluster A, B, C, D, whatever. And you use we've modified what are called unsupervised algorithms, where we direct those algorithms to look at the data set and put people into clusters that are similar. How are they similar? It depends on what data you get the algorithms to look at and how that data is weighted for the algorithms. And again, this takes a lot of timing, a lot of effort, a lot of trial and error, and it's a very lengthy process. But at the end of the day, you really do end up with some amazing outcomes. You can't call them anything. It's still just cluster A, B, C, and D, because you don't know why the algorithms put those people together in a cluster. The only thing you know is that the algorithms looked at the data you asked them to look at, and you weighted that data if necessary, and they basically come back, and the only thing you control is the data sets they look at and the number of clusters that you can create. Otherwise, unsupervised algorithms go out and basically build these on their own. There was always a joke, because we obviously wanted to test this, and so we looked at some of the data that were, for organizations that were part of the pilot process, and we sort of looked at some of the information that was coming out for people just to see whether or not there was anything we could kind of visually detect that was similar. And we decided that, because one of them is like the intended emotion of an email. Like that's one of the content classification values, categories with different values. And we decided that at the end of the day, anybody that was in cluster B, you didn't want to get stuck in an elevator with. So, you could see that the algorithms were actually doing their thing and doing it properly. So when you've got each of these clusters, you put similar people together. If the use case, again, just for the sake of purposes of saying single donor to monthly, you want to look at the people who are in that cluster and say, okay, who has within this data set successfully gone from a single donor to a monthly donor? And now a different set of algorithms look within that set of data, which was the training data. That's the machine learning. So you say everyone in cluster A, here's this subset of people who have achieved the outcome, the purpose of the use case. Can we now find out within that data set what the patterns are so that we can effectively predict the most likely outcome for everybody else in cluster A? And you do the same thing for cluster B, for cluster C, for cluster D, for whatever. And you kind of go on from there. So that's a very quick overview of machine learning, but I just wanted to give you a sense of kind of the approach that we've taken. We released our second generation models last July. And our first generation models actually produced some really interesting outcomes, like incredibly positive. There was our primary pilot client at that point was the Rainforest Action Network. And yeah, the outcomes were actually spectacular. But the approach was to say, let's get out and send a stream of emails over 4 or 5 weeks to a supporter that the algorithms are specifying the content. So they're defining what the content should be for each of those emails over 4 or 5 weeks. And again, the outcome was extremely positive. But the problem is that once you put everyone through that, you now have to go back and basically either update the content, or you need to just let more people qualify for the use case and go through, but it's going to be a trickle at that point. So it meant a lot of work for the client organization to go back in and update that content every single time. Plus, we also wanted to test some of the assumptions that we'd made. One of them was that, the time on file, we had never considered that. And then we started doing some analysis, and we looked at entropy, we looked at the issue taxonomy, we looked at all kinds of stuff. And we actually realized we would be much more effective if we clustered people based on time on file segments, because people behave differently based on the amount of time that they've spent basically in your marketing. So if there's 0 to 60 days, 60 to 180, 180 to 365 or more than a year, you actually cluster them differently, because the influence of the content categories in some of the other data sets is different. And so you need to basically create clusters that are focused on time on file, and now you create a much more dynamic process where you've got someone like this who, for example, gets clustered in cluster A, and they've been on your file for 2 weeks. They either convert for the purpose of the use case, or they don't convert. If they don't convert, then you wait, and then you hit them again with a smaller number of emails. So you kind of have 1, 2, maybe 3 emails that you trigger in a short burst. So you basically send out 1, 2, 3 emails based on a cluster within a segment of time on file. If they don't convert, they get reclustered. They get sent another 1 or 2 emails. If they don't convert, then their next segment in time on file, they get another series of emails. And then obviously if they've been on for more than a year, then you can give them another series of emails. But they're short bursts. And so to visualize this differently in terms of your marketing communications as nonprofits, you think about your marketing communications to your supporters. We just kind of take those supporters that are qualified for a specific use case, borrow them for a couple of days while we target, 2 or 3 days while we send a couple of timed emails, and they go right back into your marketing communications. So basically you're marketing to the same people that the AI defined emails are also going to. So you're continuing to market to your supporters. You're doing your thing, trying to do all of meet all the marketing objectives that you've set for yourselves. But at the same time, we're just kind of pulling these people out, sending them a couple of emails, and those emails, based on their cluster and based on what the algorithms have defined as the most likely content categories and values that are going to influence their decision, they get sent and then they get pulled out. Does that make sense for everyone? Is that clear? Yeah? Okay. So these are our second generation models. I'm just going to take you through a couple of very quick screens just to show you some stuff on the platform. So these are screens from the actual Accessible Intelligence platform, which I have to say is completely integrated with Engaging Networks. So there's nothing, if you're an Engaging Networks client, your transactional information gets sent over, obviously if you're using Accessible Intelligence, gets sent over into Accessible Intelligence where the models get run, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's nothing for you to do. There's no APIs you have to set up. There's nothing. It's just, you literally, there's a link in your Engaging Networks dashboard. You click on it, and you get logged right into your AI, basically, view of your dashboard. So there's nothing to do. And so this is just showing, for example, where you initially start the process of building emails. So for example, you've got 0 to 60 days. Well, this is a comp. This is 0 to 30, but anyway. You've got, for example, cluster A, B, and C. You've got 2 emails or 1 email for each of those. And you literally then just click on them and you go into an email create process. And depending on so the algorithms have specified content that you should put into each of these emails. And I'm happy to talk about a lot of this stuff in more detail because you might think, do I have to define an email with 40 categories? And the answer is no. If the algorithms are not influenced by a particular content category, they're not going to specify something for you. In most cases, there's usually about 5, 6, or 7 categories where there's a specified value by the algorithms. The other categories are not specified because the algorithms, it didn't influence the outcome. It doesn't basically increase the accuracy of the prediction. So this is a kind of a way in which you can use to filter your Engaging Networks email library. So now you guys are the ones who go in and create the email content, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But you're going in to create the email content specified for the algorithms for each use case. So we wanted to make the process as easy as possible. And so because we've already labeled your email, your marketing content, we can tell you that based on what the algorithm is specified for issue taxonomy or intended emotion or whatever that category is, here are the emails that you've already built within Engaging Networks that most exactly fit the requirements of the algorithm. And then you can filter that based on issue taxonomy or whatever. So you can use your Engaging Networks library to basically pull out content based on recency, based on a lot of filters, and you can use that as a starting point to basically build new content. Or you can build it from scratch. And I'm going to talk about natural language processing in a minute. So this is just an example of what you see in Accessible Intelligence. You basically, you don't always see a llama. I mean, sure, sometimes you see a llama, but not always. And so you get, for example, here, this particular email, if it's been pulled in from the Engaging Networks library, then you'll see that, for example, on the left-hand side are the content categories with the specified values. The green ones, like activity focus or primary image emotion, are green, which means that this email you've pulled in basically already meets those criteria. But the outcome, the intended outcome of the action that you're asking people to take, or the headline centricity, so is it about the program, is it about the supporter, is it about whatever, that needs to be tweaked, and then what's the writing emotion, et cetera. And then you can go in and make these changes, and then our data labeling team will check them just to make sure they're consistent with the way that they actually produce their, or assign their values for each category, so you can then go in and basically build the emails. And of course, there's reporting tools as well, which are very cool. So that's just to give you a quick overview of what happens in the Accessible Intelligence dashboard that's connected to, obviously, Engaging Networks. So outcomes. So we had these second generation models were launched last year in June. And the really, really annoying thing about the second generation models is we had to wait a year before we could get accurate outcomes because people get retargeted in each period of time on file. So you couldn't just release them and go, okay, a month later, here's how we did, because that same individual who's new to your file is going to get retargeted basically over the course of 12 months. So we had to wait a long time. We had to wait 12 months. I couldn't say anything, which is really hard for me. So we basically had to sit there for a year and wait. This, and we also come into this problem is you've now got, for example, in this case, Amnesty Canada. Is there anyone, did George come down? No. No, okay. Because he loves this stuff. But anyway, but Amnesty International Canada was one of the pilot clients, and they had a lot of data that they put into the flows for the AI-defined content. And there were two benchmarks that we decided to look at, because don't forget, this AI-defined content that's being sent to supporters of Amnesty Canada is only being sent in a short burst. At the same time, Amnesty's trying to do the same thing. Like, they have email content going out to these same supporters, asking them to, whatever, become a monthly donor. In this case, it was actually activist to donor. So how do you untangle all that? Like, how do you get decent metrics to be able to understand the efficacy of what's happening? And so we came up with two benchmarks, and one is basically direct email attribution. So if you're somebody who qualified for this use case, activist to donor, because I'm a non-donor, but I'm an activist, and I'm going through the full 12 months, what happened to those same individuals? How many of them clicked through as a percentage those Amnesty emails asking them to become a donor versus the emails that were sent that were defined by AI? So they had a total of 21,638 qualified supporters that went into the AI marketing stream over the course of this 12 months. They sent them, Amnesty sent them their own emails, 1.116573, so 1.1 million emails Amnesty sent to these people. And the AI-defined emails, there was a total of 34,000 that were sent. And if you look at the conversion rate for activist to donor within the same group of people, you get a much higher conversion rate for the AI-defined content versus the content that Amnesty was sending on its own. So that's one metric that we used. You can see it's a 246% improvement based on conversion rates. The interesting thing is that even if you said, for example, monthly donor to sustainer, and you said, okay, and I'm going to show you some examples from that as well. If you actually then just said, well, let's say someone who got the AI-defined email or the client email, and they didn't become a sustainer, but they still made a single donation, the actual outcome or conversion rate direct from those emails is still more than double, which is amazing for all clients, whatever the outcome is. So we decided to look at a second benchmark, which was essentially a static benchmark. So we said, okay, before they launched Accessible Intelligence's platform to these supporters, what was the overall, for qualified supporters, what was the overall conversion rate for activist to donor on a period of about 2 years prior to launch? So we basically took a static benchmark and said, okay, what was the conversion rate? It was 0.1%. And again, this is only people that we would have qualified for as AI, because it's not fair if we took all of their data and said, what's that conversion rate? That's comparing apples and oranges, because that would include a ton of data records that AI could not have actually clustered or sent content to, because you actually need to have a certain qualification to get into this, which is based on recency and level of activity. I think it can be as little as 1 click, but it needs to be fairly recent in order to qualify. Otherwise, you don't have the data. Like, if you don't have the data, machine learning just doesn't work. And so this, again, also showed a huge improvement. So it was a 1.12% improvement on the benchmark pre-launch versus what was going on for all email communication. So for everything that AI was doing plus Amnesty was doing together. Does that make sense for everyone? And by the way, if you go to accessibleintelligence.io, on there's a blog post that talks about metrics and kind of the challenges of trying to sort of disentangle this information, this data. Mercy Home was a really interesting organization to work with because they actually had a very small number of data records that would qualify and a very small number that actually went into the marketing streams. And so this was an interesting challenge for us. And also the emotive kind of change in their email tone was a little bit not as wide as it would be for Amnesty, which is actually talking about a huge range of issues. And so it was interesting to see whether or not the algorithms could work as effectively with a smaller organization that had email content that was a lot more similar in tone or approach than, for example, an Amnesty or a Rainforest Action Network. And again, the numbers were huge. They sent out to only 1,883 qualified supporters. They sent 40,723 emails, 7 conversions. This is single donor to monthly. And they sent out the AI-defined content was sent out total of 3,000 emails to these supporters, and the rate to sustainers was 0.36%, which was like almost a 2,000% improvement. And again, this is direct email attribution to the same individuals. And then the second benchmark, again, it was an 88% improvement based on their static benchmark. And then Rainforest Action Network was the last one. Where, again, we looked at, they had 6,663 that went through. They sent them 643,000 emails. And this is, again, one-time donor to monthly. This was a huge improvement. 10,000 emails versus, 643,000. And the actual number of conversions was significantly higher for the AI-defined content. And then their benchmark improvement was, again, about that same level. So what I like about this is the consistency versus the benchmark is always about 100% improvement, 88%, 83%. There's a lot more variance in the email conversion rate for that attribution, and I think that's because a lot of it really varies depending on the organization's own history and how they write emails, their approach to writing emails. So you're getting a lot more variance in the direct email attribution to the same supporter, but on the actual static benchmark, you're getting just this consistent about, doubling basically the conversion rate based on the historic data. Does that make sense to everyone? So we were pretty happy with what we were seeing. Oh, yeah.
For benchmark 1, I see the small circles, 27,
Yeah.
21. That's the number of people?
Correct.
Okay, so what you're showing is the conversion by email.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, direct email contribution. So to the same person. So that's the same person was getting 600, well, the same group of people were getting 643,000 emails that were written by the organization on their own. And that same group got 10,681 emails that were defined by the algorithms. So they, in the end, ran, just like all these clients, wrote all of this email content, but the email content that went out, these 10,681 emails that went out, the content that they needed to write was defined by an algorithm. So they said, if you're talking to people in cluster A, this is what you need to write. Not write, but...
You say that the Rand's own emails did generate more
Yeah.
sustainers in this case.
Yeah.
But it took a lot more
Yeah,
emails.
correct, absolutely correct, yep. And I think what we're doing now is we're gonna add an additional benchmark where we just take a dynamic portion of the data and we set it aside, and then we just basically have that run in parallel. The problem with that, of course, is that clients want everyone if someone's qualified for that AI stream, they don't want to take them out of the AI stream for a year to wait for the outcome. But that's really something we're having conversations with the clients now because that's really what we would like to do. But the funny thing is, whether it was the first generation models or these models, every time you looked at any metric, like total conversion rate, click rates, if you looked at the static benchmark, whatever you looked at, the AI-defined content always performed better. So it was pretty exciting. So let me just talk, and I'm getting to EN now as well, so if we'll just hang on here. So this is the roadmap. So we've got a great team of data scientists at Accessible Intelligence, and we've got a couple more people coming on board. And one of the things that you've obviously heard a lot about is ChatGPT-3, what we call generative AI. And this is an amazing piece for us to really put together because, as I mentioned, when you go in the process of creating the content that's being defined by the algorithms, you guys are the ones that have to write the email. So we can give you a leg up by showing you the emails that most closely respond to the criteria specified by the algorithms in your own Engaging Networks library. So that's a step in the right direction. But we started questioning the extent to which we could use generative AI and what they call large language models to start actually generating that content for you. And this is actually a slide from May of last year before all the ChatGPT-3 stuff came out. And the results were really quite amazing using it. It's obviously, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but the plan now in terms of our roadmap, and the first version of this is going to come out in November of this year, is that when you've got clusters and you need to now build that email content that's being defined by the algorithms, you now say, okay, I can have the option of building it from scratch. I can take content from my Engaging Networks library, or I can use AI-generated content. And our approach to that is to basically say, okay, the algorithms have defined the email content. We want to use a large language model, but what we want to do is actually build this vector database of your email content because we've labeled it now. We've labeled your email content. So it's possible for us to have a large language model learn not just from its own data, but actually learn also from your own email content, which has been defined. So basically the prompt becomes, okay, write an email, this is the issue taxonomy, here's the intended emotion, here's blah, blah, blah. And by the way, here's a bunch of emails that you can learn from that go into kind of the prompt and the adjustment into our model effectively so that we can combine that with actually what comes out of the large language model. So, and I think this is an essential thing. A lot of people play with, like, whether it's ChatGPT-3, to kind of look at the extent to which you can create content, and it really is quite amazing. But it's not exactly in your voice. It's not exactly in the way that you would necessarily write those emails. So I think that the essential approach to generative AI is to make sure that you're actually combining large language models with content from the organization so that the writing style can more closely approximate the writing style of the organization itself. So this is the approach. We have 3 phases for rolling this out. The first one is actually the head of our NLP stuff he said October, but I'm saying November, which is going to be just the LLM process for generating content. But then we're going to go back in January and have the first version of the client-defined content going into that process. The other thing that we're working on this year is to automate the content classification. So we have data labelers who are putting together all the data labels, but we think we can automate a lot of that. So the bottom graph is what you can see. Wherever those blue columns are, those are content categories where the blue is well below the red line. That red line is the threshold that we need to have data consistency to make sure that we can reliably give this data to the algorithms. So there's a bunch of categories that were relatively easy for us to get that bar up to where we needed it to be. There's other categories where we're now using deep learning models to be able to get that more consistently. So this is another important component, is to automate the content classification and then to also help you with the content creation. In terms of engaging networks versus accessible intelligence, and I'm gonna skip through this fairly quickly. Accessible intelligence, basically, we have core models that are then customized for an individual. We have the data labeling team that will label your content going back 18 months. So the product in accessible intelligence is set up to be able to provide these kind of outcomes that we were talking about in the metrics. Engaging networks, what we're trying to do now is take all of that and see where in engaging networks can we fit this learning into the Engaging Networks core product. So what can we do there? And I think we've come to the conclusion fairly rapidly that we can't obviously data label everyone's content, so that depends on how quickly we can automate some of the classification values. We can't do things like issue taxonomy in aggregate models because not all organizations campaign or activate or have program content based on the same issues or the same subjects. So there's a lot of stuff that we can do in accessible intelligence that we can't do in engaging networks, but we have done a lot of testing and modeling on aggregate models to figure out whether or not the core approach can still produce basically a bump for conversion rates and the efficacy of your marketing in engaging networks, and the answer is absolutely yes. So it's not going to be accessible intelligence, but it's going to be basically an opportunity to create some improvement in using some of the core tools in engaging networks. I'm going to skip this slide, but basically this shows the data flows between engaging networks and accessible intelligence. This is a screen where we're showing basically like mini AI marketing streams that we can build into engaging networks. Again, not with the same predictive accuracy, because again, we can't use issue taxonomy, we can't use all the classification values. There's a bunch of things that can't be done in engaging networks that can be done in accessible intelligence. But still, if you're looking to, for example, go into this new tab, which will ultimately be called AI Marketing Streams, you will be able to actually take an individual use case that we've built within accessible intelligence, pull that up, have your supporters clustered with some defined content that should go out to each of them over time on file, et cetera, et cetera. But the really big thing is that you're going to have fewer categories defining that content, and therefore the predictive accuracy is not going to be as good. But it will still be based on our testing. It's still going to be better than whatever your benchmark is. The other thing we want to do is obviously in the new messaging tools, we talked about smart lists. And the idea, again, is in the previous one, AI marketing streams, it was interesting because that's where the models are essentially putting people into those different clusters within each use case. Here, you're sending out a bulk email. So you're defining your audience. You're saying, here's everyone I want to write to. But we're going to say, hey, well, you know what? If you want to, you can add a smart list where you can say, okay, it's based on those same use cases, but you say, okay, let's pull out all the activist non-donors in this universe of people that I want to write to. Let's pull them out. Oh, okay, I can see they've been clustered in 3 different ways, and here's what the algorithms have specified. So now within your bulk email, if you want to, you have the option of creating subsets of your core email template that essentially are now being defined by AI, which based on whatever the purpose of the email is, that it'll vary the tiles, et cetera, will have an impact. So basically the idea is that there's 2 immediate places through sort of mini AI marketing streams in engaging networks and within the bulk messaging system. So for example, emergency appeals. If you guys do emergency appeals, wouldn't it be good to know what kind of content you want to put into that emergency appeal based on how someone's clustered, for example, like on intended emotional response or whatever it happens to be. So that's an example of where you can take some of this information, create variations of that bulk email that the algorithms have said are predictively going to give you a better outcome. Does that make sense? Okay, so I think we're out of time. I'm just going to say there is we have a really cool concept that's being developed now. It's going to take us a couple of years to pull this together. But today, just before the reception at 5:30, if anyone wants to dig into this, the sort of the future concept, and also talk about anything that I presented today, is it 5:30? Is someone there? Is it 5:30? No one knows. Okay, I think it is 5:30. So at 5:30, if you come up to the 3rd floor, I'll be there, and I'd be more than happy. I mean, also you can catch me during the day and obviously have that conversation. But engaging networks, just to reiterate, we still have the exact same engineering resource on the front end, back end data set for the core tools of engaging networks. So nothing is getting dropped. Our commitment to innovation on the core tools is exactly the same as it's ever been for the last 20 years. So whether it's peer-to-peer, our new reporting tools, anything we're doing on one-click donations, everything that you're going to hear Dan talk about, that team is all still fully committed to everything that's working within the core tools of engaging networks. This is essentially a separate project. And what we're trying to do now is obviously make this a successful product at Accessible Intelligence, but at the same time take these learnings and bring them in to kind of supercharge some of the engaging networks tool sets where we can do that. Does that make sense? Okay. So it's a brave new world. And there's a lot of change going on, but we've been working at it hard for the last few years, doing a lot of this research and development. But we're very excited about what all of this work is going to do to essentially help you become more effective and more successful in your work. So thank you very much.